Imagine you're working a normal shift, just trying to pay your bills and get home to your daughter. Then you notice something everyone else is missing. Something that could get someone killed. Do you speak up and risk everything? Or do you stay silent and live with what happens next? Tonight, I'm telling you the story of Imani Reeves, a single mother, a waitress, invisible to everyone around her. She's learned that keeping her head down is how you survive. But on one ordinary night, everything changes when a group of dangerous men walk into her restaurant. At the center of them is someone powerful, someone people fear, without knowing why. And Imani sees what no one else does, the threat closing in from every direction. She has seconds to decide. Warn a stranger, a dangerous stranger, and risk everything. Or say nothing and watch violence unfold. Imani doesn't stay silent. What happens next will throw her into a world of bullets, betrayal, and impossible choices, where one 60-second warning changes 2 lives forever. Before we dive into what happens, if you love stories that make you feel something, stories about courage, redemption, and humanity in the darkest places, smash that like button right now. And listen, this story gets incredibly intense. Subscribe and hit the notification bell because you won't want to miss a single moment. Drop a comment and tell me, would you risk everything to save a stranger? Let me know below. Alright, let's get into it, because Imani's decision is about to change everything and the clock is already ticking. Imani Reeves clocked in at 6:47 p.m., the digital screen blinking green like it always did, indifferent to how tired her bones felt. She tied her apron tighter than necessary, smoothed her uniform, and took a breath before stepping onto the floor. The restaurant glowed with soft amber light, all polished wood and quiet jazz, the kind of place where people paid more for atmosphere than food. She'd learned to move carefully here, measured steps, polite smile, eyes down unless spoken to. Invisible was safe. Invisible paid the rent. Her day had started before sunrise, dropping her daughter off with a neighbor before catching 2 buses across town. By the time she arrived, her feet already ached, but she welcomed the routine. Routine meant control. It meant predictability. She scanned her section automatically, noting who needed water, who wanted attention, who preferred to be left alone. Observation was a skill she'd picked up long before waitressing, back when noticing the wrong car or the wrong look could keep you alive. The door opened just after 7. Imani felt it before she saw it. The shift in the room, the subtle tightening of shoulders, conversations dipping half a note lower. A group of men entered, dressed sharp but understated, their movements disciplined, eyes constantly working. They didn't look like tourists or businessmen enjoying a night out. They looked like men on assignment, and at the center of them was him. He didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. The host straightened too quickly. A nearby table fell silent. Even the clink of silverware seemed to hesitate as the Korean man was led to a corner booth with clear sight lines to every exit. He sat with controlled ease, spine straight, hands relaxed, expression unreadable. Power radiated from him, cold and contained. Imani poured water with steady hands while her instincts whispered. No visible security near him.
No laughter. No menus touched.
The men flanking him didn't eat. They watched. Outside the window, a black van idled longer than necessary. 2 men at the bar hadn't ordered anything in 15 minutes. One kept checking his phone. The other kept checking the door. Her pulse quickened. She moved through the dining room, pretending not to notice as pieces clicked into place. This wasn't paranoia. This was pattern recognition. She'd seen this tension before, in different clothes on different streets, but it always ended the same way. Violence. Her tray felt heavier with every step. Her mind raced ahead, calculating consequences. If she said something and she was wrong, she'd lose her job. Maybe worse. If she said nothing and she was right, she didn't want to finish that thought. Her daughter's face flashed in her mind. The promise she made every night to come home safe. Imani stopped near the service station, heart pounding. "Stay in your lane," a voice inside her warned. "People like you don't get involved in things like this." But another voice, quieter, steadier, answered back. "People like you notice things others don't." She glanced toward the corner booth again. The man lifted his glass, eyes sweeping the room with calm precision. He had no idea how close the walls were closing in. Imani tightened her grip on the tray. She had a choice to make. Choi Jun-seong had learned long ago that power was quiet. It didn't announce itself or demand attention. It simply existed, and the world adjusted around it. As he sat in the corner booth, the restaurant bending subtly to his presence, he felt that familiar stillness settle into his bones. The hum of conversation, the muted clink of glasses, the careful distance people kept without knowing why, it all confirmed what he already knew. He was untouchable. He had clawed his way up from nothing. A childhood spent in cramped rooms and borrowed silence, watching men with money decide who mattered and who didn't. He learned early that fear traveled faster than respect, and once he mastered fear, respect followed. By the time he crossed the ocean and expanded his operations into America, his name no longer needed translation. Doors opened. Enemies disappeared. Loyalty was enforced, not requested. Tonight's dinner was business, nothing more. A negotiation with local partners who preferred luxury settings and polite words to warehouses and threats. Jun-seong tolerated it because it kept the money clean and the violence distant. He didn't need a full security detail here. Not tonight. Not in a place like this. Anyone foolish enough to try something would be dead before they stood up. His eyes moved constantly, habit rather than concern. He noted exits, reflections in glass, the placement of tables. Everything appeared normal. Civilians eating overpriced food. Staff moving with rehearsed efficiency.
No visible threats.
No tension worth acknowledging. Then the waitress approached. He barely looked at her at first. Another face, another uniform, another person passing through his world for less than a minute. He listened with half an ear as she leaned closer than necessary, her presence registering only as a breach of protocol. "It's dangerous for you to stay one more minute," she whispered. "They're here for you." The words cut through him sharper than any blade. Jun-seong's gaze snapped to her face. Her eyes weren't begging. They weren't greedy. They were steady and afraid in a way he recognized. Not fear for herself alone. Fear born of certainty. For a split second, his instinct flared hot and immediate. Arrogance surged. Who was this woman to warn him? What did she think she knew about danger, about his world? People had tried to kill him before. They always fail. But then the other instinct stirred, the one that had kept him alive when others died young and loud. Survival. He replayed her words, measured her tone. He studied the way her hands trembled despite her effort to control them. He followed the direction of her gaze, without moving his head. The men at the bar. The van outside. The absence of his usual perimeter. Pride told him to dismiss her, to wave her away and remind her of her place. Experience told him something was wrong. Jun-seong leaned back slightly, masking the shift in his thoughts. The world had taught him never to trust kindness. But it had also taught him this. Warnings never came for free. And sometimes, the most dangerous mistake a powerful man could make was assuming he already knew everything. Jun-seong did not react right away. He let the waitress walk away, her warnings settling into him like a stone dropped into still water. Around him, the restaurant continued its performance. Forks scraping porcelain, low laughter, a server pouring wine, but the illusion had cracked. He leaned back slightly, eyes half-lidded, and allowed himself to truly look. Once he did, he couldn't unsee it. The men at the bar weren't drinking. One kept his shoulders angled toward the entrance, the other toward the restrooms. Coverage, not comfort. The black van outside idled with its headlights off, engine vibration faint but constant. Even the music felt off, as if it were being swallowed by the air. His instincts, sharpened by decades of survival, began connecting the same as the waitress had seen. He had been arrogant to dismiss the possibility of an attack. Not because enemies didn't exist, but because betrayal always wore a familiar face. Jun-seong shifted his hand, brushing his cuff as if adjusting it. The movement was subtle, meaningless to anyone watching casually. But across the room, one of his men, a younger lieutenant he still trusted, caught it immediately. Their eyes met for half a second. The message was clear. Be ready. Jun-seong's pulse remained steady. Calm was a discipline. Panic was for men who didn't plan ahead. He reached for his glass, never breaking eye contact with the room's reflection in the darkened window beside him. In it he saw motion, too coordinated to be coincidence. Someone stood near the door, who hadn't been there before. Another figure slipped toward the hallway that led to the kitchen. The clock in his head began counting down. Across the room, Imani felt the shift before she understood it. The warning had been spoken. The line crossed, and now there was no returning to invisibility. She moved behind the service station, pretending to check an order, but her skin prickled with awareness. She noticed the same man blocking the exit. The way another customer's jacket sagged unnaturally at the waist. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't just about him anymore. If something happened, she was in the open.
No weapon.
No protection. Just a name on a schedule and a daughter waiting at home. Fear rose fast, sharp and suffocating, but she forced herself to breathe through it. She scanned for cover, for a path, for any sign that someone else knew what was coming.
Jun-seong stood.
Not abruptly, nothing dramatic. He pushed back his chair with measured control, as if excusing himself to take a call. The men at his table tensed, the air around them tightening like a drawn wire. He took one slow step, then another, positioning himself just enough to see both exits clearly. The lights flickered. Just once. Barely noticeable.
Jun-seong's jaw tightened.
Power outage or signal. Either way, it meant the storm had arrived. Imani's heart slammed against her ribs as the room held its breath. And then everything went dark. The first shot cracked through the restaurant like a plate shattering against stone. For half a second, no one understood what had happened. Then glass exploded, a chandelier screamed as it fell, and the room dissolved into panic. Chairs scraped, tables overturned, and civilians surged toward the exits, their screams colliding with the gunfire. The smell of cordite cut through soy and sesame oil, sharp and unmistakable. Jun-seong was already moving. His body reacted before his mind finished the thought. He shoved his chair back, twisting as a second bullet tore through the space where his head had been. His hand snapped under the table, fingers closing around steel. Calm settled over him like a second skin, cold and absolute. He rose in one smooth motion, returning fire with precision that spoke of years carved in violence. One attacker went down hard, collapsing into a pool of shattered porcelain. Imani froze behind the service counter, her heart slamming against her ribs. She saw everything at once. The masked gunman near the bar, the terrified couple trapped in the corner, Jun-seong moving with lethal grace. Then the third shooter appeared, flanking through the side aisle, muzzle swinging wide. Straight toward her. The world narrowed. Imani ducked as the counter above her splintered. She crawled, breath ragged, hands slick with spilled sauce and fear. A body crashed nearby, and she screamed before realizing it wasn't hers. The noise, the smoke, the chaos, it swallowed her whole. Jun-seong saw her then. Not as a bystander. Not as furniture in the background of bloodshed. As a life about to be erased. He made the decision without hesitation. He lunged, crossing open ground as bullets chewed into wood and tile. He slammed into Imani, dragging her down as he fired blind over his shoulder. The third shooter dropped with a wet thud. Jun-seong didn't slow. He wrapped an arm around Imani's shoulders and pulled her upright. Kitchen, he barked, voice iron. They ran. through swinging doors, past stunned cooks and boiling pots abandoned mid-flame. A shot rang out behind them, ricocheting off steel. Jun-seong kicked open the back exit, shoving Imani through into the cold night. Tires screeched. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. They didn't stop until the alley swallowed them whole. Minutes later, Jun-seong leaned against brick, chest heaving. Blood dripped from his knuckles, not all of it his. Imani slid down the wall, shaking alive. Inside the restaurant, bodies lay still. Police lights painted the sky red and blue. The attempt had failed. But nothing would ever be the same. Can we just take a moment? Imani just went from serving appetizers to dodging bullets for a man she doesn't even know. If you're feeling that adrenaline rush right now, hit that like button. And here's the thing. This story is about to get even more complicated because now Imani is on their radar. If you want to see how she survives what's coming next, you better subscribe right now. Seriously, click that red button. And comment below. Do you think Jun-seong will protect her? Or is she on her own? I want to hear your predictions. Okay, let's jump back in. Because the next 24 hours are about to test both of them in ways they never imagined. The safe house was nothing like Imani imagined. No velvet or gold. No armed guards pacing the halls. Just a quiet apartment tucked above a closed tailor shop. Lights dimmed, curtains drawn tight against the city. The door locked behind them with a soft, final click that made her flinch harder than any gunshot. Shock settled in layers. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. The silence pressed too loud against her ears, filling the space where screams had been minutes before. Jun-seong moved with purpose, checking corners, windows, and the hallway beyond the peephole. Only when he was satisfied did he turn back to her. "Sit," he said gently, surprising them both. She perched on the edge of the couch, eyes unfocused. He knelt in front of her, rolling up her sleeve before she could protest. A thin line of blood traced her forearm where flying glass had kissed skin. His touch was careful, almost reverent, as he cleaned the cut and pressed gauze into place.
No rules. No commands.
Just patience. "You're in shock," he murmured. "Breathe." She tried. The air felt too small. When he finished, she pulled her arm back and finally looked at him. Really looked. The blood spatter on his collar, the tight control barely holding him together. "Who are you?" Her voice trembled, but it didn't break. "And don't lie. Men don't die like that for nobodies." He exhaled slowly, as if setting something heavy down. "My name is Jun-seong," he said. "And I lead an organization that makes powerful enemies." He didn't say the word Mafia. He didn't have to. She swallowed. "I figured." Silence stretched between them, fragile but honest. Then fear surged, hot and sharp. "My daughter," she blurted.
She's 8.
She was supposed to be asleep right now. "If those people find me." "They won't," he said, too quickly to be rehearsed. At her look, he steadied himself. "No one will touch her. Or you. I swear it." Promises from dangerous men should have meant nothing. And yet, something in his eyes shifted. Not steel, but resolve stripped bare. "Why?" she asked. "Why help me?" "Because you warned me," he replied. "Because you didn't run when you could have. And because tonight, you became a liability to my enemies." She let out a shaky laugh. "That's not comforting. It's honest." Her shoulders sagged, exhaustion finally cutting through adrenaline. "I didn't ask for this." "I know," he said quietly. "Neither did I." They sat there, two strangers bound by violence neither had chosen, the distance between them shrinking not with trust, but with understanding. For the first time, Imani saw not a monster, but a man shaped by survival. And for the first time in years, Jun-seong felt the weight of another life resting in his hands, and chose to carry it. By morning, the safe house no longer felt like shelter. It felt like a cage.
Jun-seong barely slept.
He moved from room to room with quiet urgency, Phone pressed to his ear, voice low and lethal. Names were spoken, locations confirmed, timelines torn apart and rebuilt. Every detail of the restaurant replayed in his mind. The angle of the first shot, the delay before the flank, the precision of the escape routes. This wasn't random. It was intimate. Someone had known exactly where he would be. Imani watched from the edge of the living room, wrapped in a borrowed sweater that smelled faintly of detergent and smoke. She wasn't restrained, but every door was locked. Every window is sealed. Men she didn't recognize came and went, nodding respectfully to Jun-seong, barely looking at her. Their loyalty was quiet, unquestioning. Their fear is even quieter. She hated how useless she felt. When Jun-seong finally paused, she stood. "My daughter," she said, the words burning a hole through her chest. "You said she'd be safe." He didn't hesitate. He gestured for her to follow and led her into the bedroom where a laptop sat open on the desk. A live feed filled the screen, her apartment building, the front entrance, 2 men stationed discreetly near the door. Another camera showed her daughter's school playground, a familiar splash of color and laughter. "She's being watched," he said. "Protected. No one knows why." Imani pressed a hand to her mouth. Relief hit so hard it made her knees weak. "Thank you," she whispered, and meant more than the words could carry. The day dragged on. Calls turned sharper. One man left with blood on his sleeve and wouldn't meet her eyes. Another argued in hushed tones until Jun-seong silenced him with a look. Violence hummed beneath every interaction, close enough to feel, even when it wasn't shown. Late afternoon, she found Jun-seong alone at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. A small photograph lay between his hands, creased, old. A woman with tired eyes and a soft smile. "My mother," he said, without looking up. She used to say power was just another kind of loneliness. Imani sat across from him, the space between them no longer empty. Was she right? He closed his fingers around the photo. Every day, night fell, and with it, the truth. Jun-seong stood before his inner circle, voice calm, eyes dark. "It was Min-jae," he said. The room went still. The name landed heavy, his oldest friend, his second in command. The man who had stood beside him through blood and fire. Imani felt the air change. Betrayal always did that. It poisoned everything it touched. Jun-seong nodded once, decision hardening into something final. "Prepare the car," he said. "I'll handle this myself." The hunt was over. The reckoning had begun. The rain started sometime after midnight, soft at first, then steady, tapping against the reinforced windows like fingers asking to be let in. The safe house felt smaller in the dark, stripped of its urgency now that the phones were quiet. For the first time since the shooting, Jun-seong and Imani sat across from each other with nothing demanding their attention but the truth. She broke the silence. "I didn't plan this life," Imani said, her voice low but steady. "I wanted school. I wanted to travel. I wanted options." She smiled faintly, without humor. "Then I got pregnant." Her father promised the world and disappeared before the first ultrasound. She looked down at her hands. "So, I learned how to survive instead. Double shifts. Smiling at people who didn't see me. Telling my daughter bedtime stories about places we might never go."
Jun-seong listened without interrupting.
He always did that, gave people his full attention when he chose to. It was disarming. "She's everything," Imani continued. "Every hard choice makes sense because of her. But tonight, her voice caught. Tonight, I realized how close I came to never seeing her again."
Jun-seong exhaled slowly.
"I know that fear." She looked up, surprised. "I grew up with nothing," he said. "A single room. A mother who worked herself into the ground. Men like me now decide whether we eat."
His jaw tightened.
"I promised myself I'd never be powerless again. I kept that promise. But power," he paused, searching for the right word. It takes payment, friends, sleep, innocence, and peace, Imani said softly. A corner of his mouth lifted. Especially peace. They laughed then, quiet, unexpected. The sound startled them both. It had been years since Jun-seong laughed without calculation, without an audience. For a brief moment, the distance between their worlds felt smaller. Not gone, but crossed. You know this can't last, Imani said eventually. You and me. This space. I know, he replied. You don't belong in my world. She met his gaze. Neither do you. Not really. The words landed deeper than she intended. He didn't argue. I made mistakes, Jun-seong said after a long pause. They're coming due, but you won't pay for them.
Not you.
Not your daughter. His voice hardened, not with threat, but with resolve. I'll end this. And when I do, you walk away. Clean. Imani nodded, respect blooming where fear once lived. Whatever he was a man who kept his word. And they both knew neither of them would ever be the same again. This is what I love about the story. It's not just about guns and gangsters. It's about two people from completely different worlds finding something real in the middle of chaos. If you're invested in Imani and Jun-seong's connection, show some love. And if you want to see more stories that go this deep, that make you feel something real, subscribe to the channel. We're building a community of people who appreciate stories with heart and substance. Comment and tell me, what's the most unexpected friendship or connection you've ever experienced? Share your story below. Now let's get back to it, because Jun-seong is about to discover who betrayed him, and when he does, there's going to be hell to pay. The plan came together with ruthless precision. Jun-seong chose the place himself, an abandoned riverside warehouse that once moved legitimate cargo, back when the organization still pretended to care about appearances. It was neutral ground, familiar enough to feel safe, isolated enough to bury secrets. Every entrance was mapped. Every exit is covered. Loyalty tested twice. When Imani realized she wasn't being left behind, she didn't pretend to be calm. I'm coming, she said, meeting his gaze without flinching. You said I wouldn't pay for your mistakes. That doesn't mean I sit in a room pretending they don't exist. Jun-seong studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Stay where I tell you. Watch. That's enough. The warehouse smelled of oil and rust, the river slapping against concrete like a slow heartbeat. Min-jae was already there when they arrived, hands visible, posture relaxed. Too relaxed. He smiled when he saw Jun-seong, the old familiarity flickering in his eyes. You always liked the dramatic entrance, Min-jae said. And you always underestimated silence, Jun-seong replied. The men spread out. Guns stayed lowered but ready. The tension was a wire pulled tight. You sold me out, Jun-seong said calmly. Why? Min-jae laughed, sharp and bitter. Because I built this with you. And then you forgot who bled for it. His eyes flicked to Imani, curiosity sharpening. You got soft. Imani felt it then, a shift. Min-jae's right hand kept drifting toward his jacket, not for a gun, but something heavier. His men weren't positioned for negotiation. They were positioned for distraction. She stepped closer to Jun-seong and whispered, the left side. They're not here for talk. Jun-seong moved instantly, voice cutting through the air. Enough. Gunfire erupted anyway. Chaos exploded in deafening cracks. One of Min-jae's men went down. Another dove for cover. Jun-seong moved like a machine honed by years of violence, disarming one attacker, firing once. Precise, final. Imani dropped behind a crate, heart hammering, eyes wide but focused. Min-jae reached for his weapon. Jun-seong had him dead to rights. Time slowed. In another life, the trigger would have been pulled without thought. But Jun-seong saw Imani's face in his mind. Her daughter's. His mother's tired smile. He lowered the gun. Leave, he said. You're alive. because of what you meant to me. But you're nothing here anymore. Min-jae stared, disbelief giving way to humiliation. Two of Jun-seong's men dragged him back, stripped him of everything that made him dangerous, and pushed him toward the door. Exile. Worse than death in this world. The message was clear. When the warehouse finally went quiet, Jun-seong exhaled. The reckoning was over, but he knew the cost had already changed him forever. The aftermath was quiet, almost surreal. The warehouse, once a battleground, now stood empty but for the lingering tension and the echo of footsteps that would never be repeated. Jun-seong returned to his office, alone, and began the painstaking work of reshaping the organization he had built with blood and calculation. There would be new codes, stricter loyalty, and an understanding that power carried consequences beyond fear. Every decision would carry weight, every action accounted for. Imani, meanwhile, was adjusting to a world that no longer felt entirely foreign but still demanded vigilance. Jun-seong had made arrangements, her daughter's college funds secured, her career prospects elevated with connections and recommendations, protection that extended even beyond her immediate family. She resisted at first, refusing to see it as charity. "I didn't ask for this," she said sharply, arms crossed, eyes fierce. "I survived because I had to." He studied her, expression unreadable, then spoke with the kind of certainty that left no room for argument. "This isn't charity. Consider it debt repaid. A life saved has its own currency." Her shoulders eased. It wasn't the words themselves, but the recognition that he honored what she had done in the only way he knew how. She accepted it, not because she needed help, but because she understood the weight behind the gesture. This was Jun-seong's way of acknowledging that her courage had changed more than one life. Their final conversation came in the dim light of the safe house, shadows stretching long across the floor. Imani looked at him, a mixture of gratitude and resolve in her eyes. "Our worlds, they can't stay together," she said softly. "But I'm not the same woman who walked into your restaurant." He nodded, corners of his mouth lifting faintly. "Nor am I the same man who would have fired without thought. You've changed something in me, Imani. Never forget that." She smiled, a quiet, knowing smile, and gathered her belongings. The journey back to her daughter was both literal and symbolic. She walked into the apartment with a new perspective, carrying the knowledge that she wielded power in ways she hadn't imagined. Power earned through courage, through choice, through surviving the impossible. Jun-seong remained behind, alone in his office, the city lights spilling across his desk. He stared at the faint reflection of himself in the glass, thinking about the cost of humanity, about what it demanded and what it returned. For the first time in years, he allowed himself the vulnerability of reflection, not strategy, not control, just thought. The reckoning had been brutal, but the transformation that followed, both in his world and in hers, was the price he was willing to pay. And somewhere in that quiet, he understood that life, for all its violence and chaos, also offered a rare and precious kind of redemption. It was fleeting, fragile, but undeniable. 6 months had passed, and the world had shifted beneath both of them. Imani moved through her college campus with the quiet confidence of someone who had survived storms others couldn't imagine. Her daughter's laughter echoed in her phone calls, lighter than it had ever been, and Imani marveled at the resilience she saw reflected there. "Mom," her daughter asked one evening, "will you tell me about that night again?" Imani smiled softly, recalling the chaos and courage that had defined it. "It's not a story of fear," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It's about knowing when to stand, when to speak, and how one choice can ripple farther than you think. And sometimes, you find strength in the most unexpected places." Meanwhile, Jun-seong had begun shifting his operations. The streets still respected him, but the violence that once defined every decision was tempered now by calculation and strategy. Investments in legitimate business began to rise: construction, logistics, even a few tech ventures. Loyalty remained, but the currency had changed. Fewer lives lost, more influence gained. Their paths crossed unexpectedly one late afternoon in a quiet, sunlit café. Imani, sipping her coffee and reading through a pile of coursework, looked up and saw him. Jun-seong paused in the doorway, his expression unreadable at first, then softened into the barest hint of a smile. She felt the familiar tension, but also the acknowledgement of mutual respect, the recognition of everything they had endured and survived together. "Imani," he said quietly, settling into the chair across from her. "You're doing well." "You've changed too," she replied, noticing the calm in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "I didn't think I'd see it." They spoke briefly, words careful but honest, gratitude and understanding weaving silently between them. There was no need for more. The unspoken acknowledgement said it all. They had altered each other's lives in ways that neither could reverse, and that truth was enough. Later that evening, Jun-seong returned to his office, the city lights reflecting across the polished floors. He sat alone, hands clasped loosely, thinking about the choices that had defined these 6 months. 1 minute, one warning, one act of courage had set everything into motion. Every change, every life touched, traced back to that single instant. He allowed himself a rare exhale, the weight of power mingling with the fragile beauty of humanity. Redemption, he realized, was not a gift. It was the quiet acknowledgement that courage mattered, that integrity could ripple outward, that life, no matter how dark, always left room for light. And sometimes survival was not enough. Sometimes it required choosing to honor what was right, even when the world demanded otherwise. And there it is. From a 60-second warning to a completely changed life, for both of them. Imani walked into that restaurant invisible, just another waitress trying to make ends meet. She walked out a hero who saved a life and found her own power. Jun-seong walked in as a cold, untouchable mafia boss. He walked out as a man who remembered what it means to be human. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it gave you even a fraction of the feeling you get when you finish an amazing movie, then please hit that like button. Let me know this story resonated with you. Subscribe to this channel because we're just getting started with stories that matter, stories that make you feel, stories that remind you that courage and humanity can show up in the most unexpected places. And here's what I want from you in the comments. Tell me about a time when you chose courage over comfort. When did you step up even though you were scared? When did you help someone even though you didn't have to? Share your story below because I read every single comment, and your story might inspire someone else. And finally, share this video. Send it to someone who needs to hear a story about hope, about redemption, about the power of one moment to change everything. This is more than entertainment. This is a reminder that we all have the power to make a difference, no matter who we are or where we come from. Thank you for being here, for investing your time in this story, and for being part of this community. Until the next story, remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is exactly what Imani did. Speak up when it matters, even when you're scared. Especially when you're scared. I'll see you in the next one.